The plane dropped suddenly, 1,000 feet in 3 seconds. Oxygen masks fell from the ceiling. People screamed. The pilot's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the controls. Warning lights flashed red across every panel. And from the back of the plane, an old man slowly stood up. He was maybe 70, worn jacket, weathered face. The same man everyone had judged at the gate. The same man a wealthy passenger had sneered at. People like him shouldn't even be flying. Now that old man walked calmly toward the cockpit. His voice was steady. "I know what's happening, and if you don't let me help, we won't survive this." But let's go back. To understand this moment, you need to know the whole story. His name was Robert Hayes, 68 years old, and 20 years ago, he'd been one of the best pilots in the country. But today, at the airport, nobody knew that. Nobody cared. Robert stood in the check-in line at Denver International. His jacket was old, his bag was small, his posture was tired. The ticket agent looked at him with barely concealed impatience. "Boarding pass?" Robert handed it over. "Coach, middle seat." The agent's expression said it all. Behind him, a man in a designer suit sighed loudly. "Some people need to learn how to use the self-service kiosks," he muttered. Robert said nothing, just took his ticket bag and moved on. At security, it got worse. The TSA agent pulled him aside. "Random screening." It wasn't random. Robert knew that. He stood there while they went through his small bag, everything he owned, a change of clothes, toiletries, a book, and a photograph. The agent held it up, a younger Robert in a pilot's uniform, standing beside a woman, both smiling. "You were a pilot?" the agent asked. "Yes." "Not anymore?" Robert's jaw tightened. "Not anymore." The agent shrugged and tossed the photo back. Robert repacked his bag with quiet dignity. At the gate, he sat in the corner, away from everyone. But he could hear them, a group of business travelers, laughing, talking loudly. One of them, Marcus Webb, a real estate mogul, looked over at Robert. "Look at that guy," Marcus said to his companions. "People like him shouldn't even be flying, should be a bus." His friends laughed. Robert heard every word, but he said nothing, just looked out the window at the planes. He'd flown for 30 years, logged over 20,000 hours, never had an accident, until the one that wasn't his fault. But we'll get to that. Boarding began. Robert waited until his group was called, Zone 4. He walked down the jetway slowly. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant, Sarah Chen, smiled professionally. "Welcome aboard." Robert nodded and moved to a seat. Middle seat, row 32, between a teenager with headphones and a businessman who immediately claimed both armrests. Robert squeezed in. The businessman didn't even look up from his phone. Robert buckled his seatbelt and noticed something, a sound, faint but wrong. He'd heard thousands of aircraft sounds in his life. This one shouldn't be there. A slight hydraulic whine, inconsistent. Robert frowned. But what could he do? He was nobody now, just an old man in a middle seat. The plane pushed back from the gate. In the cockpit, Captain David Miller ran through the pre-flight checklist. David was 28 years old. This was his first flight as captain. He'd been a first officer for 3 years, done well, passed all his tests. But today, sitting in the left seat, the captain's seat, he felt the weight of 186 lives. His hands were sweating. "You good?" his first officer, Tom Richards, asked. "Yeah," David lied. "All good." They received clearance for takeoff. David taxied to the runway, applied throttle. The Boeing 737 accelerated. 100 knots, 120, 140. Rotation. The nose lifted, and they were airborne. David exhaled. First part done. Now just a smooth 3-hour flight to Seattle. What could go wrong? In the cabin, passengers settled in, some reading, some sleeping, some working. Robert sat quietly, still listening. That sound was still there, getting slightly worse. 20 minutes into the flight, the first officer noticed something. "Captain, I'm seeing a pressure drop in hydraulic system 2. David looked at the gauge.
Yellow light. How much? 5%. Could just be a sensor. Keep an eye on it. But 5 minutes later, 10% now. David's heart rate increased. Run the checklist. They worked through it, but the pressure kept dropping. In the cabin, Robert unbuckled and stood. The flight attendant, Sarah, noticed immediately. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is on. You need to sit down." "I need to speak to the captain," calmly said Robert. Sarah smiled. "I'm sure everything is fine. Please return to your seat." "There's a hydraulic problem," Robert said. "I can hear it, and if it's what I think it is, you have maybe 10 minutes before it becomes critical." Sarah's faded. "Sir, how could you possibly?" "Because I flew for 30 years, and I know this aircraft better than anyone on this plane." Sarah hesitated. She pressed the call button to the cockpit. "Flight deck? Captain, there's a passenger who says..." But she didn't finish, because that's when the first alarm went off. Hydraulic System 2 failure. David's eyes went wide. The hell? Then the second alarm. Hydraulic System 1 pressure drop. Tom looked at David. "That's not possible. Both systems?" David's hands were shaking. He'd trained for emergencies, but this was happening too fast. The plane shuddered. Passengers gasped, and then the turbulence hit. Not weather turbulence, flight control turbulence. The plane was becoming unstable. David grabbed the controls, but they felt wrong, mushy, unresponsive. "Seattle Center, this is Flight 447. We're showing irregular altitude on your transponder. Everything okay up there?" David's voice cracked. "Seattle Center, we have dual hydraulic failure. We're trying to maintain control." In the cabin, panic erupted. The plane dropped suddenly, 300 feet, 500 feet. Oxygen masks deployed. People screamed. Sarah grabbed the PA. "Everyone, remain calm. Put on your oxygen masks. Follow the safety." But she was interrupted by another drop. The plane fell 1,000 feet in 3 seconds. Marcus Webb, the man who'd mocked Robert, was screaming, "We're gonna die! We're all gonna die!" Others joined in, crying, praying, calling loved ones. And Robert Hayes stood up, calmly. He walked down the tilting aisle toward the cockpit. Sarah tried to stop him. "Sir, you can't." "Open the door," Robert said. "Now." "I can't just..." Robert looked at her with absolute certainty. "That pilot is 28 years old, and he's never dealt with a dual hydraulic failure. I have twice. And if you don't open that door in the next 30 seconds, everyone on this plane dies." Sarah stared at him, then made a decision. She knocked on the cockpit door. "Captain, there's a passenger who says..." But David's voice was panicked. "Not now. He says he's a pilot. He says he knows what's happening." Silence. Then, "Send him in." Sarah opened the door. Robert stepped into the cockpit. David looked back at him, saw an old man in a worn jacket. "Who are you?" "My name is Robert Hayes. I flew 737s for 30 years, and I know what's wrong with this aircraft." Tom looked skeptical. "You're not..." "Your hydraulic failure isn't a leak. It's a cascade failure from a faulty valve in System 2. I've seen it before. If you keep trying to use the controls normally, you'll burn out what's left of System 1 in about 2 minutes. Then you'll have nothing." David's face was pale. "What do I do?" Robert moved closer. "First, stop overcorrecting. You're making it worse. Second, switch to alternate flight control law. Third, we're going to fly this aircraft manually using throttle differential and trim." "I have," Robert said calmly. "Let me help you." David looked at this stranger, then at his first officer, then at the screaming passengers behind them. He made a choice. "Okay." Robert squeezed into the jump seat behind them. "Tom, can I call you Tom? I need you to switch hydraulic pumps to emergency mode." Tom did it. "David, I need you to reduce throttle on engine 1 by 5%. David hesitated. "Trust me," Robert said. David did it. The plane's roll immediately lessened. "Good. Now increase throttle on engine 2 by 3%. The aircraft began to level. In the cabin, passengers noticed. The violent shaking was decreasing. People looked around, confused, hopeful. In the cockpit, Robert worked. Calm, methodical, precise. We've lost most of our hydraulics, but we still have engine thrust and some trim control. We can fly this aircraft, but the landing is going to be difficult. How difficult? Robert was quiet for a moment. I won't lie to you. Without hydraulics, we have no normal braking, no thrust reversers, no spoilers. We're going to need the longest runway possible and emergency services standing by. David swallowed hard. Seattle Center, this is Flight 447. We need priority landing, longest runway, full emergency response. Flight 447, copy. Runway 16R is available. 11,900 feet. Fire and rescue are rolling now. 30 minutes. That's how long it took to fly the crippled aircraft to Seattle. Robert guided David through every second.
Small corrections. Don't fight the aircraft, work with it. Throttle back on 1, that's it. Feel how she responds? You're doing great, just keep her steady. In the cabin, word had spread. An old man, the one they'd all dismissed, was in the cockpit, saving them. Marcus Webb sat in his first-class seat, pale, quiet, thinking about what he'd said at the gate. People like him shouldn't even be flying. Now that man was the only reason they'd survive. By the way, where are you watching this from? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing where these stories reach. 20 miles from the airport, Robert spoke to the passengers. Sarah handed him the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Robert Hayes speaking from the cockpit. I know you're scared. I know this has been terrifying, but I want you to know we're going to land this aircraft safely. His voice was steady, confident. When we land, it's going to be fast and loud, but the captain and I have done this before. Trust us, trust the crew, and when we stop, follow their instructions exactly. He handed the PA back. Sarah looked at him with tears in her eyes. Thank you. Robert just nodded. 5 miles out. Gear down, Robert said. David pulled the lever. They felt the landing gear extend, manually, no hydraulics to help. Final approach. Keep your speed at 180 knots. Don't let it drop below 160. David's hands were steadier now. Robert's calm had transferred to him. 2 miles. 1 mile. The airport appeared ahead. Fire trucks lined both sides, ambulances, emergency vehicles. 50 feet, called Tom. 40. 30. 20. Robert's voice was calm. Easy, easy. Let her settle. The wheels touched, hard. The aircraft bounced once, then settled again. But without thrust reversers or spoilers, the aircraft wasn't slowing fast enough. Maximum manual braking, Robert said, and keep the nose down. David stood on the brakes. The aircraft shuddered. The end of the runway was approaching, fast. 8,000 feet left. 6,000. 4,000. Passengers braced, prayed. 2,000 feet. Come on, David whispered. 1,000 feet. The aircraft was slowing, but would it be enough? 500 feet. 300. The plane stopped, with 200 feet of runway remaining. Silence. Then, cheers, crying, applause. The cabin erupted. People hugged, sobbed, laughed. They were alive. In the cockpit, David collapsed back in his seat. Oh my God! Oh my God! Tom was crying. Robert just sat quietly. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft. The evacuation was quick and orderly. Nobody was seriously hurt. A miracle. Robert was the last one to leave the cockpit. As he walked through the cabin, people stood, applauding, some crying. A woman touched his arm. Thank you so much. Robert just nodded. When he reached the exit, Marcus Webb was waiting, the man who'd mocked him at the gate. Their eyes met. Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. I'm sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. I was wrong. Robert looked at him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Marcus took it. "We all make mistakes," Robert said quietly. On the tarmac, news crews were already arriving. The story was spreading. Miracle landing at SeaTac. Mysterious passenger saves Flight 447. Who is the hero of Flight 447? David stood beside Robert. "They're going to want to interview you. You're a hero." Robert shook his head. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a pilot who did his job." "But who are you?" David asked. "Really?" Robert was quiet. Then Sarah, the flight attendant, handed him something, the photograph from his bag, the one of him in uniform. "I saw your name on the manifest," she said quietly. "Robert Hayes. I looked you up. You're Captain Robert Hayes, the one from Flight 1842. David's eyes widened. Everyone in aviation knew that name. Flight 1842. 15 years ago, the flight that almost crashed, the pilot who was blamed. Robert looked at the photograph. "I need to tell you something about why I'm not a pilot anymore." "What time is it where you are? Morning? Afternoon? Night? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing where these stories reach." 15 years ago, Robert Hayes was at the peak of his career. Senior captain, instructor pilot, 15,000 flight hours, respected, trusted. Then came Flight 1842, New York to Los Angeles. Robert was captain. During pre-flight inspection, he noticed something, a hydraulic line, showing slight wear. He reported it to maintenance. They checked it. "It's within tolerance," they said. "Safe to fly." But Robert wasn't sure. "I'd feel better if we replaced it." The maintenance supervisor was annoyed. "Captain, I've been doing this for 20 years. The line is fine. If we replace every part that shows wear, we'd never get a plane off the ground." The gate agent appeared. "Captain Hayes, we're already 15 minutes behind schedule." Robert made a decision he would regret forever. He signed off the aircraft, and they took off. 2 hours into the flight, that hydraulic line failed, exactly as Robert had feared. The aircraft lost hydraulics. Robert managed to land it, hard, but everyone survived. 12 injuries, none life-threatening. But the investigation focused on one thing. Why did the captain fly with a questionable hydraulic line? Robert explained. Maintenance had cleared it, said it was safe. But maintenance had a different story. The captain mentioned the line, but he didn't insist we replace it. He signed off the aircraft. The airline needed someone to blame. Equipment failure? That's expensive, bad publicity. But pilot error? Much easier. Robert was suspended pending investigation. The FAA reviewed the case. The airline's lawyers painted him as reckless, flying with a known defect. The media picked it up. Pilot ignores warning, nearly kills 186 passengers. Robert's name was destroyed. He tried to fight it, hired a lawyer, demanded the full maintenance records, but the airline stonewalled. 6 months later, the FAA revoked his license. Failure to exercise appropriate judgment. Robert appealed. For 3 years he fought, spent his savings, lost his house. His wife, Emma, stood by him. "We'll get through this," she'd say, but the strain was crushing. Finally, 4 years after the incident, new evidence emerged. A whistleblower from the airline. Maintenance records had been altered. The hydraulic line had actually been flagged for replacement 3 inspections earlier, but replacing it would have grounded the aircraft, cost money, so they marked it as acceptable instead. And when it failed, they blamed Robert. The truth came out, too late to save Robert's career. The FAA quietly reinstated his license, but no airline would hire him. He was 65 by then, too old.
Evidence now public. They issued a formal statement. Captain Robert Hayes acted appropriately given the information available. The fault lies with maintenance procedures and corporate pressure to minimize delays.
Robert's name was cleared. Officially, David Miller, the young pilot, called him. "I want you to know something. You saved my life, and you taught me more in 30 minutes than I learned in 3 years of training." He paused. "Would you consider doing instruction, training pilots, sharing what you know?" Robert thought about it. Maybe, but not for an airline. They had their chance. What about independent instruction, safety consulting? Robert smiled. That I could do. 6 months later, Robert Hayes started a consulting firm, teaching pilots about the realities of emergency situations, not textbook scenarios, real ones. His first client? The FAA, who hired him to help redesign their emergency training protocols, and every new pilot who went through the program heard the story of Flight 447 and learned what real piloting looks like. 1 year after the incident, there was a ceremony. The FAA presented Robert with an award for exceptional service to aviation safety. All 186 passengers from Flight 447 were invited. Marcus Webb was there, the man who'd mocked Robert at the airport. He stood up and spoke. "I judged this man by his appearance, by his worn jacket and his cheap seat. I'm ashamed of that." He looked at Robert. "You saved my life, and you taught me never to judge someone without knowing their story." The room applauded. David Miller was there too, now a confident captain himself. "Robert Hayes is the reason I'm alive, and the reason I'm a better pilot." At the end, Robert spoke. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who refused to give up on what I knew was right." He looked at Emma. "And I had someone who never gave up on me." Emma smiled, tears in her eyes. The lesson? Never judge people by what they look like, by what they've lost, by what seat they're sitting in. The old man in the worn jacket might be the person who saves your life. The quiet person you dismiss might be the expert you need. Everyone has a story. Everyone has value. And sometimes the people the world forgot are the ones who change everything. Robert Hayes lost his career to injustice, but he never lost who he was, a pilot who saved 186 lives when it mattered most. If this story touched you, drop a heart in the comments. Follow for more stories about second chances and never giving up. And the next time you see someone everyone else dismisses, remember Robert Hayes. Remember that you never know who you're looking at, and treat everyone with the respect they deserve, because someday that person might be the only thing standing between you and disaster.